Hey, good evening, welcome. Tom, come in. Welcome everyone to this first lecture of the new session of MedChi. I was trying to work out, I think it's about 197th, it's either 197th or 198th. So thank you very much for coming. We've had some apologies for absence from Caroline Anderson, Marilyn Horner, Jonathan Corn, Margaret Jones, Christine Johnson, Tony Avery and Susan Ward. A reminder that this year's charity, President's Charity, as it has been for the last couple of years, is Doctors in Distress, a charity who do an enormous amount of worthwhile work supporting doctors in difficulty. There's a QR code here, and we'll be encouraging donations at all of our events over the year. The next meeting, just looking ahead in 3 weeks' time, is with Mr. Henry Marsh, who I was speaking to yesterday. He's very much looking forward to coming. And he's actually changed his title slightly. The sharp eye, you might notice, to the previous list of lectures for the year. He now wants to call it Prima Non Nocere, so First Do No Harm, which you might know if you read his books, was the title of his first book. Painful lessons from 45 years in neurosurgery. I've known him for years, and he's evolved, becoming a more reflective character in his later years, and I think we'll see that when he comes to talk to us, and I think he should be very good indeed. So that's 3 weeks from now here in this theatre. So into the business of tonight, which is my presidential address, which sounds very grand. So I thought what I would talk to you about is my mixed relationship with technologies over the years, because I quite like technology at times, and I get quite frustrated by technology at times, and that goes across my life. So we'll try and keep it a bit broad. But let's talk about how I've embraced technologies. I do have a little script, so I'll get that out just to keep me on track and stop me from rambling too much. But yeah, there's a nice thing. Fancy looking MR imaging. None of us can choose the time of our birth or the place in the wider sweep of humankind's great history. But on the whole, I'm relatively pleased to have arrived when I did. The stock dropped me off there, as you can see, through the 20th century. But proud Scot by heritage, I made my appearance in 1967 in Sutton, Surrey, which is a bit embarrassing, but you can't choose location either. And we didn't spend too long there before moving back to Scotland properly. Shortly after my sister's wedding, there, and about 2 years before the first moon landing in 1969. So I then benefited from the next few decades, which saw all sorts of fabulous things happen. We had supersonic travel, widespread distribution of lovely colour television sets. We had the arrival of the personal computer, 5 arriving and looking just like that one there. I was very proud of it. The Nokia 3010, and then lots of smartphones that came after that. And I suppose more gradually we had the takeover of digital photography, digital images, digital music, and a society in which rapid communication and dissemination were the norm. The pace at which each of these things arrived in our lives, I think, is astonishing. To someone of my generation, I think I'm Generation X, looking at the kind of sociological groupings there. But these things seem taken for granted by today's young people. The Generation Z, I think they anticipate, unlike us in the egg timer generation, they think that almost everything in life, from a piece of streamed music to a bit of Amazon shopping, can be accessed almost immediately. There are dangers as well as benefits from this acceleration in the information superhighway. The mere normalization of misinformation, fake news, lack of to make poorly considered conclusions, call into question the very nature of what truth is in society now, leaving us feel adrift in a world lacking of good certainties. Political and societal discourse has been somewhat simplified, and etiquette and debate is in danger of being forgotten. The culture of soundbite and immediacy, I think, risks a decline in the ability to concentrate in traditional learning and problem-solving skills. Educators and reformers are having to adapt quite a bit, and I was discussing this with the editor of the British Journal of Neurosurgery recently, as he reflected encyclopedia that will take weeks to read to a TikTok generation trainee who's looking for an answer to a very specific question in 60 seconds. On the whole, I think I am a fan of technologies, but with some degree of reservation. I can at times be a bit of a late adopter. Perhaps this is down to family background. Both my parents in the middle there. My father was a Lewis man from the remote and wild nest in the top left where he was born to. High level of education, he had a PhD in polymer chemistry and worked for BP for many years researching plastics. He demonstrated what seemed to me at times as a kid a rather illogical and superstitious approach to scientific progress. He would tell me jokingly that an older woman in the village I would put her electric light on in the gathering gloom of the afternoon so she could see to light her candle. Then take the lights off and sit by candlelight all evening. About this. But yeah, this same scientific man warned me in no uncertain term that, do you remember these little earpieces he got in the 1970s, transistor radios? He warned me under no uncertain terms I should not put one of those in my ear due to the high risk of electrocution. And he presumably thought the arrival of the Walkman would lift the elimination of mankind. So to be fair to my father, when I searched this on the now all-powerful internet at the weekend, I did discover on the no doubt highly trustworthy Vice site that a 16-year-old has died after being electrocuted by his headphones. So Dr. Alan John MacArthur, you were right. And in the AI overview, it is a rare but possible occurrence. So I should have listened. In my own medical career, I can recall a few technological landmarks. I first submitted a word process rather than neatly handwritten article of work as a dissertation in 1988. So it was a literature review, and much of the literature review had been carried out via the very traditional, very time-consuming method of going to the library, looking through Science Citation Index, Index Medicus, spending a lot of time on dusty shelves and ordering reprints of the really obscure ones that I couldn't find. I first personally introduced a computer into the doctor's room at the surgical ward in the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh in 1991. Whilst my boss, the legendary, iconic Edinburgh surgeon I.B. MacLeod, looked somewhat sceptically on from his corner, where he used to sit on Lister's former chair, quietly and effectively supervising the firm. He had his own office, but as Bill will remember, he prepared to sit in with the hoi polloi in our office and supervise us directly. So this thing was plugged into an old black and white telly as a screen, and it had a cassette recorder that we used to load and unload the data. And I.B. MacLeod looked at it in a rather bemused manner, and he was probably right to have his doubts. But things did move quite quickly, and by the mid to late 90s, in 1996, with my boss there, Steve Nixon, I worked looking at a computerized database in a program called DBase of all of the surgical deaths in the Scottish Audit of Surgical Mortality in South East Scotland to produce one of the most influential papers of it. A big difference in all of that work. And in 1993, I also by chance worked with another visionary physician, a chap called Lee Kennedy, the emergency department in the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh. He had the idea that you could use machine learning with an artificial neural network to educate it on how to diagnose myocardial infarction from some of the parameters, the clinical and ECG parameters. Created an early and very successful decision support tool and gave me a publication in this very obscure journal, Computer Methods and Programs in Biomedicine. So after flirtations in other areas of surgery like general and cardiothoracic surgery and doing the old general FRCS, I entered neurosurgical training in 1995. Opinion varies depending on where you are from in Britain, especially it was about a century old at that point. Opinion varies on where the first craniotomy for tumour was done. Those of us from Scotland, William McEwen did it in Glasgow in 1879 because he took out a meningeally based tumour then. But if you want an intrinsic tumour removal, that was done using a spoon for Whitman Dudley in London in 1884. And how did he know where the tumour was going to be? The neurologist told him. So they worked out where the tumour was going to be, did the craniotomy, which was quite a brave thing to do at that time, to get the tumour with a spoon. These pioneers had very little surgery, to be frank. They certainly didn't have much evidence about anything structurally, and all that was to change with the introductions into clinical practice. You can see in 1972, one of the first ever grainy CT scans. It's not great quality, is it? People thought that was miraculous at the time. In 1983, at the bottom there, you Spanish MRI scan, the first clinical MRI scan. So the 70s and the 80s saw huge changes in neurosurgical. Our neurology colleagues historically insisted that the two fundamental questions in understanding pathology and if you will remember this, where is the lesion, which was typically determined by doing a theatrical and exhaustive neurological examination, and what is the lesion, which was typically determined by thinking about the time course of the onset and the evolution of the symptoms. And good clinicians had deduced what was going on in the brain and the spinal cord for generations without ever actually thinking about structurally imaging it. I do remember Charles Warlow, when I was there, he was a great figure, saying that a telephone was likely to be much more used than a tendon hammer, as you would actually learn something by phoning a relative to get some crucial collateral history using the telephone, as well as the fact that most doctors were much better at using a telephone than they were at using a tendon hammer. So I'm sure he was right. But considering most of the scans back then, if you remember the old MDT meetings, everything was presented then right at the end. It was, what does the scans show? It was supplementary or confirmatory rather than central to the diagnostic process. And what I've observed in my career over the last 30 years has been a change in emphasis. With the growing availability, quality of imaging, ease in acquiring it, and ease in sharing it, just turned the traditional process upside down. And most neurosurgical referrals and discussions, here's how you talk to us now. We don't like to talk to you in person. You have to talk to your computer system called Refer a Patient. Our referrals and discussions start now with scrutiny of the imaging, with a history of clinical findings often being reduced to the status of a few footnotes to add context here. 3 weeks of right weakness, bit confused, unclipidable, etc. We get about 20 or 30 referrals like this to our inbox in our regional unit most days, and as they ping into the inbox, I do worry that the individual and human element of medicine is devalued, and the focus on these CT and MRI images that show structure, show pathology, but abstracted and removed from any sense of personal suffering, or this great character of a hat here, that you get no sense of that when you look at this. The easy availability of CT scanning and emergency radiology reporting of it has transformed the management of head injury, one of our commonest problems, from an era of managed uncertainty where on weekend nights huge numbers of patients were admitted for neuro-obs just in case they deteriorated and needed to have a scan. So treatment now in a way where the majority just get scanned and then get sent home. For those with more significant injury, detailed MRIs now allow us to visualize subtle but sinister pathology such as diffuse axonal injury from tearing and shearing of the axons, and understand why patients without obvious hematomas or contusions are not waking up in the ITU. In some cases now, the scanner will even tell us the answer. Who needs a radiologist when we can look at that? The suspected ICH. I think it's probably right as well. And our brain hemorrhage patients now benefit from rapid, non-invasive angiographic techniques, which give us high-resolution images of cerebral vessel aneurysms and branches, allowing us to almost immediately assess the treatability of these aneurysms. And happily for us, our expert colleagues in interventional neuroradiology can usually look at these and can then say, I can fix that, and can effectively protect these aneurysms from rebleeding, such that only a small minority of patients now need to come for craniotomy and clipping of aneurysm. The operation that was one of the rites of passage for our trainees in my generation, and one that could be quite challenging for patient and surgeon alike. My main field of work over the years has been surgical management of brain tumours in adults and children, and the growth and understanding of tumour biology and the increase in technologies used to assess and treat tumours has carried us from an era of therapeutic nihilism in the 1980s. I remember once giving a talk and someone standing up and saying, "You're wasting your time, laddie, they're all going to die." And I thought that's slightly harsh, but I do understand his point. And it's become now one of the most active and popular specialties in neurosurgery now. Modern MRI has evolved rapidly, providing high-resolution images now of structure, and we can see even very small abnormalities like that beautifully delineated. Brain tracts, the ability to demonstrate areas of function in brain, such as in this image of a mum and baby. And it can be formatted in 3D in our computers and theatre to help us understand what to expect as we're approaching the sulci past the veins and so on. But during training, I spent 1 year in the Department of Academic Radiology doing a doctorate in tumour imaging. You can use techniques such as MR spectroscopy, perfusion imaging, and diffusion imaging to make inferences about tumour cellularity and aggressiveness and predict behaviour in what you hope are low-grade tumours under observation. That can help you decide whether to continue observing or whether you need well-timed surgery, anticipating that the tumour is now on the turn and de-differentiating. Very high-resolution imaging, such as this CIS scan on the right in children, is used now to allow us to find tiny dots. That tiny thing hanging down like a light bulb is actually an area of recurrent tumour, which was important for the child and needed to be removed for prognostic benefit. And we managed to fish that one out using a neuroendoscope like this in a relatively quick operation. Image guidance systems are the big advance in tumour neurosurgery and provide us with a surgical sat-nav, which guides us from the outside of the scalp down to the tumour and to its points of attachment, and show all the surrounding tract and the vessels which we need to protect and avoid. The old guard were a bit sceptical when these things arrived and said, why do I need that? I can do this without them. But I think I would agree now that they have contributed enormously to making surgery for brain tumours faster and better tolerated through smaller, more optimally located flaps. It's safer because there's a reduced chance of going astray and injuring adjacent structures. They remain, however, a surgical tool, and there is a learning curve and a strong element of operator dependence in their use. And time spent patiently invested in the accurate registration system, which is how it begins. You have to tell the computer where the patient is in theatre if you want it to then tell you where the structures are in the patient. So you have to spend time on registration accurately to ensure that you then get accurate navigation, allowing you to find your way around, find your way past the tracts that matter, or, for example, in this case, to take a deep brainstem biopsy accurately and safely. And you can see in the bottom of the MRI scan there, the surgical tract, which has gone nicely down into the brainstem to take a sample of that tumour. One of the issues with image guidance is brain shift, and that's the tendency of structures in the brain to move when the head is opened or part of a tumour is resected. And it means that the preoperatively acquired map that you've got becomes out of date and potentially misleading. And for situations where continued accurate targeting of structures is vital, the technology has evolved to allow us to re-image the brain during surgery to update our map and retarget. It's not an entirely natural fusion of technologies, as operating theatres tend to be full of sharp, dangerous metal objects. And if there's one thing that MRI scanners and radiologists and radiographers don't like, it's heavy metal instruments that might move towards the scanner. So-called intraoperative MRI technologies, nonetheless, have tried to wed the two areas together, and they've been available since the 1990s, and certainly in growing use, particularly in children's tumour surgery, over about the last 15 years. There's my friend Conor Malucci in Liverpool showing Prince William around the first Alder Hay scanner in 2009 when it opened. Perhaps my biggest encounter with technology, and likely the most lasting contribution I'll have made to my hospital and unit when I finished, was to drive on and lead a project to install IMRI here in Nottingham. I started to think about that back in about 2012, but it became a reality over the years thanks to a combined funding arrangement between the University of Nottingham, Nottingham Hospitals Charity, the Big Appeal, and NUH Trust. And in 2020, we finally had enough money and the momentum to build a state-of-the-art two-room solution, IMRI, alongside one of our theatres, which in itself needed substantial modification and investment to allow the trolley transfer of the patient from operating table to scanner and back. I see David laughing there. He may have seen a picture of himself as he was involved in many of the events that we had. Oh, yes, the superheroes at the top. Many of the events that we had to raise interest and money in this. I learned a lot of lessons from this project, including identifying the key enablers that you need to work out who these people are to make this happen, and the momentum that can be gained from working alongside other departments to make sure that other people are benefiting as well. And in this case, the big beneficiaries were Neuroradiology, who acquired a new children's hospital scanner as part of the project. Fundraising, selecting equipment, travelling around Europe and seeing how it's done elsewhere was a really exciting time, and it was almost all ready for late 2020. Which you'll remember was in the first year of COVID. We even had a kind of launch evening with the mask on there, you can see, and some social distancing. And just as we were doing that, everything had to be immediately stalled again as our theatre suite became a COVID ITU for the next few months. However, happily by August 2021, we were beyond the need for that. And after lots of mock-ups and practice transfers, mainly with me being wheeled in and out of the scanner, checking that I could be pulled out in the event of fire, cardiac arrest, all sorts of things, we were ready to do patients. The anaesthetists and the transfer team were happy this was going to be safe. And we did our first adult patient in August of 2021 and our first paediatric patient shortly afterwards. In almost 100 patients now, usually performing just a single scan towards the end of the operation, we've identified areas which need re-examined or further resection in about 30% of cases, improving what's achieved in these operations and improving outcomes. This example case shows a posterior fossa tumour in a child, which you can see has been mostly resected here when we've gone into theatre for interruptive MRI, and there's just a thin sliver of tumour hiding under a bit of tissue that had appeared otherwise normal. And in the old days, we'd have finished the operation at that point. The child would have been left with a residuum and a risk that at some point that would start to cause problems, whereas in this setting, we're able to go back into theatre, do another 20 minutes, half an hour of operating, and remove it and finish the operation on the day. And that makes a huge difference to children like this. A computer to microscope interface allows us to overlay scan information in the anticipated location of areas of interest into a microscope view so that we can quickly locate areas which might have been hidden or have borderline normal macroscopic appearances for further surgical attention. So you can see here we've got a couple of little blobs of interest where the radiologist said you might want to go and take another look at that bit. And my colleague Simon Howard, who's here in the audience, understands some of this technology better than I do because I've embraced it a little bit. But it takes quite a bit of negotiation to get these images back onto the workstation theatre and then get the microscope to talk to the workstation to allow it to track them. But you can see here we've got some blue blobs telling us these are the bits that might be interesting. And you can see superimposed in there as well, we've got a bit of the scan. So in the heads-up device, you can see the scan and the operation at the same time. There's a lot of information there if you want it. Many young children also have their end of surgery scan done in the IMRI scanner, so they don't need to come back the next day to perform a general anaesthetic scan the next day. Another approach to identifying brain tumour tissue surgery is the so-called pink drink or fluorescence-guided surgery. That utilises the propensity of many glial brain tumour cells to avidly take up an oral precursor 5-ALA, aminolevulic acid, and then convert it to a fluorophore, protoporphyrin 9, which when you shine the 400 nanometer wavelength light on it, which is a bluish light, you get a very pink look from the cells. So this is a high-grade glioma, and you can see this is an adult patient with high-grade glioma seen through the surface, and then this is as it's being removed and the light is incident on it, you can see it fluoresces very, very brightly. The surgeon uses a mixture of the blue light and what's called white light operating to find the tumour, work out towards the edges of it, and then defines the edge of the margin where the cells are spreading into the brain round about using the pink. So this technology has been proven to increase the extent of resection of high-grade gliomas in adults and, more importantly, improve outcome. And it's now widely used and recommended for use in adult tumour surgery. There is evidence that many children's tumours probably do also fluoresce with 5-ALA, but the product's not licensed for use in children at the moment in the UK. So we in Nottingham are leading on a multi-centre phase 2 trial imaginatively called PED 5-ALA. Like what I did there, so a lot of thought went into that title. But PED 5-ALA, it tells you what we're doing, and we are looking in 6 centres to use this technology in 80 children to see to what extent the tumours fluoresce. There's the first one, a couple of weeks ago. It is fluorescing, but what you can see there is after the tumour's been taken out and then it's in a little bag and it's fluorescing very nicely in the bag, its level of fluorescence in situ in the patient, in that case, was not really good enough to affect what we did operatively, and we used other technologies to achieve the resection. But that's what the trial's about. It's about the added value of the 5-ALA in children. Brain tumour diagnosis, when I started doing these operations, was largely based on an experienced pathologist, there he is at the top there, looking at the architecture of stained tissue supplemented by immunostains in trickier cases. And it was essentially pattern recognition, like going to the zoo. That looks like a giraffe, that looks like a zebra. It was usually right. It was fairly quick, whereas often having a diagnosis after 2 or 3 days, but occasionally due to atypical appearances, there were cases that couldn't be accurately diagnosed, or were even misdiagnosed and then behaved unexpectedly. Neuropathological classification of tumours has undergone a revolution in the last 10 years, and it now incorporates a lot of molecular genetic information in the vast majority of cases. The number of different subdivisions of tumour types has grown exponentially, often with important different prognostic and therapeutic implications. And as molecular tests and methylation profiling have taken over and can take some weeks, we have the unfortunate scenario of knowing that we will get a really accurate diagnosis at some point, but family, patient and doctor are all keen to start planning and getting on treatment in the meantime. In the last few years, an emerging technology of rapid DNA sequencing has offered the possibility of obtaining much of the information we currently wait for within hours. And locally, we've been very fortunate in neurosurgery to work with a team, Professor Matt Luce at the University of Nottingham, bringing nanopore long-read rapid DNA sequencing techniques. A bit of a mouthful, but you can see the DNA from the tumour is essentially processed through the nanopore, and then 3 different pipelines match the molecular methylation abnormalities within it against known libraries and decide what it's likely to be. And within about 20 minutes, half an hour, it's deciding that there's a 99% chance this is a low-grade glioma. And this is a very, very accurate technique. As long as you put the right tissue in, you have to make sure the tissue you're putting in is tumour and not a mixture of tumour and normal brain or scar tissue. At the moment, it still has to be regarded as an experimental technique, but in my view, for practical reasons, it won't be long before this becomes standard of care, because we can't keep people waiting weeks. No area of neurosurgical practice has avoided the march of technology in hydrocephalus management. We can use image guidance to optimize position of shunt catheters. We can use neuroendoscopic techniques of ventriculostomy and pellucidotomy to help thousands of patients around the world avoid needing to have a shunt in the first place, as natural drainage channels have opened up the brain instead. Stimulator technologies and understanding of new targets have dramatically increased the number of types of movement disorders that can be treated by deep brain stimulation. And the increasing use of complex spinal cord monitoring techniques has given us the confidence to take on far more challenging spinal cord untethering cases than we might have done in past years. So where next for technology in neurosurgery? An obvious area for potential expansion is in robotics. All surgeons love robots, don't they? You hear about it in every branch of surgery. Neurosurgery has been perhaps a bit slower than many other branches in incorporating surgical robots to theatre. We seem to still prefer direct contact of the operating hand and instrument with the tissue. And some of us, I do, certainly, worry that robots can lack common sense when moving and working in and around the brain. We were involved in an early robot project here years ago, and at one point when the robot was going to go from one side of the head to the other side of the head with a biopsy needle in it, it started to accelerate towards the head at what I thought was quite a pace and didn't look like it was going to stop, and we had to hit the panic button. And that lack of common sense, the thought that you're not quite sure what they're going to do or whether they fully understand where the patient is, or if a robot was to drill a hole and set up a trajectory but not notice that there's a vein directly under it. You know, that's kind of lack of human common sense input makes some of us a bit nervous about using robots for the actual operation. However, they are increasingly used, particularly linked to image guidance systems, that are really good, better than a registrar, at going to a specific point and staying there for ages on end and not moving. So if you want to hold a biopsy needle somewhere, or hold an endoscope, or put in an electrode, a robot is your thing. And we already have one of these on the right side in our department, which we use for just those sorts of things. So robots, I'm sure, will have growing use. This is the other thing you see a lot of if you Google the future of brain surgery. It's all about brain-machine interfaces and neural machine interfaces, where you can capture brain signals and neural signals and convert intention into action. I'm sure these were already in existence. It won't be long before they're used more and more to help patients with brain and spinal cord injuries to see real practical improvements in function. I said I was going to talk about other things apart from neurosurgery, and I am. So while neurosurgery has been a very large part of my life, lots of my achievements have been in other areas. So families matter hugely, and I couldn't imagine my life without Mary, who is familiar to everyone here, or almost everyone here, as MedChi President 2022 to 2023. So we were the first married couple to have both been presidents of MedChi. I mean, the interesting plot of history. We were both presidents of the Royal Medical Society of Edinburgh, founded in 1737, a really old medical society, back in the 1990s. Our most substantial joint project has been our 3 kids, Catherine, James and Lucy, who have survived our somewhat busy professional careers at times to become the happy and successful individuals of whom we are hugely proud. They will tell you, if you ask them afterwards, Catherine and Lucy are up there, about my relationships with technology, because they've seen me trying to use apps on my phone or work out why Netflix isn't working, so they can give you some insight. I beg your pardon? Digital banking, love it. Love a bit of digital banking. Thank you, dear. Away from music, music has always mattered a lot to me. And I have quite eclectic tastes, from Albinoni to AC/DC. And the technology has led to huge changes in our lifetimes in the formats of recorded music, and I've still got collections in all formats, I'm pleased to say, which I can't bear to part with. I've still got most of my vinyl, apart from some of the cooler albums which the kids have stolen when vinyl became cool again. I've got drawers full of compact cassettes, and I've still got all my mixtapes, which I love and I still listen to sometimes. Sound remarkably good, I think. CDs, I've got lots and lots of CDs, and I refresh my hi-fi when occasionally something perishes. I get something to update it, and I do still like to sit down and listen to proper music on a CD on a component hi-fi system, although I can see the convenience of music streaming with Spotify. Performance-wise, I'm mainly a wind player, and first of all, I started off life on the oboe, which is one of the most ancient and not particularly technological of instruments. It hasn't changed much in hundreds of years. But I've been playing saxophone and keyboards in a couple of bands for the last 15 years or so, and I've got quite a mix of instruments, from a shiny 8-year-old soprano saxophone here to an 85-year-old vintage tenor, which, like all 85-year-olds, lacks some agility but makes up for it with bags of character. Earlier this year, threatened by a venue, it's the Beeston Fields, the walled garden there. You're not allowed any brass instruments because apparently they're too loud. So they're welcome bands, but you're not allowed brass instruments, so they have to be able to turn you down. So I bought one of these, which you can see at the back, this Darth Vader-like version of a saxophone. Is a Yamaha digital saxophone. It's not bad, actually. It feels like a saxophone. It's very light. It's easy to play. It can sound reasonably like a saxophone, or any one of, I have to check this in the manual, 73 other wind instruments, which can be dialed up at the touch of a button, including bagpipes and flutes and panpipes and voices and things. And importantly, you can turn it down. You know, if Beeston Fields feel the brother and the neighbours, you can turn it down. But it does lack probably a little bit of soul. I spent a lot of time playing keyboards over the years, from being in an extremely questionable 80s electropop duo at school to buying a grand piano in my mid-40s. It's a relatively traditional-looking instrument from the outside, although in a nod to technology, it's got Kawai's incredibly responsive carbon fibre hammer action, which I understand is allegedly the lightest and strongest material on earth, according to Kawai. I'm sure that's not true, but it means that it can play incredibly fluently and quickly, unlike me. I've owned a succession of electronic keyboards over the years, always keen to compose and multi-track record. In the 1980s, some of you may remember, the most affordable way to do that was with 2 cassettes and a double cassette deck, and you could record tape to tape, and had a great time doing that with a gradual increase in atmospheric hiss. So I did that for quite a long time. By the 1990s, movie signaling and synthesizers and PC sound cards had come along, and digitized recordings were cheaply and easily possible. I'm sorry to say, Mary probably spent much of that era. She did describe herself as a keyboard widow, as I disappeared into a man cave in an Edinburgh flat with a computer and a keyboard and a hi-fi, and just sat and turned into, with using, I don't know if anyone used these things, but that's the Etra Orchestrator, which used to record little loops. And then that's a slightly more sophisticated version, that's Steinberg Cubase 4, where you recorded and patched up songs in sections like that. And you could spend hours on this as a wannabe Jean-Michel Jarre. The recording and sequencing capacity of those kind of things, I think, was absolutely great. And for me, it was a kind of democratization of musical creation, and that you didn't actually have to have any keyboard skills. Anyone could make keyboard music at different speeds and speed it up and slow it down and mix things together. I thought that was absolutely great. But the end results could be a bit formulaic and artificial. And what happened after that, which I think was great, was the data capacity on PCs increased and short latency sound cards came along. So you could record proper real audio sound onto a computer. And that started around about 2000, 2005. And people started using cheap, widely available multi-trackers like N-Track to do that. The other thing that is a big difference is the quality and range of synthesized sounds available to the amateur user. So if anyone remembers, back in 1979, something called the Fairlight CMI came along, and then that was a computerized musical instrument, and after EMU's emulator. And these sampling keyboards, Fairlight was called the orchestra in a box, and you got a keyboard and a computer and lots of floppy disks. So you put in the flute floppy disk or the violin floppy disk. And it was primitive, but what you got instead of a synthesized sound was a recorded set of real harmonics that were then replayed at different pitches. And that was the key to it. You were actually listening to a real musical instrument, but triggered through a keyboard. And that was the beginning of sampling. And it was prohibitively expensive. So people like Peter Gabriel and Trevor Horn and a few others could buy these things, and the rest of us couldn't. Nowadays, sampling capabilities are built into the majority of synthesizers, and the keyboard I'm playing in the middle there, which cost about 500 or 600 quid, can sample to your heart's content. You can sample anything you want on that, from a single note to a drum break to an entire song, and then manipulate it, and it's 500 or 600 quid. And in today's money, a Fairlight would be about £120,000. So it's been an amazing change for amateur musicians to have fun with. I would say there's now almost a limitless capacity for music creation. And it makes it easy to give at least one answer to the question, what will you do in retirement, Donald? Because I think there's really no limit to how much time you could spend tinkering with this, along with my trusty sound engineer, Tommy, you can see there, who's supervising the whole process at the moment. The other side to the spread of this technology, however, and the almost free access to music we've all got on streaming services, is the grey area in sampled and remixed music of what now constitutes creativity, as opposed to what constitutes blatant copyright infringement. And while people debate that, more concerningly is the issue of music which is entirely AI generated, which is the next thing that's started to come along, where there's no human creativity involved in it at all. And I think that's the really worrying thing for the future of music. When I'm not in the operating theatre making music, I'm most likely to be found up a mountain somewhere. And I'm pretty traditional in outlook there, it's fair to say. I used to rock climb at university in black Woolworths plimsolls. You bought a size, half a size too small, squeezed them on, and you were good to go. I thought brightly coloured rock boots were a bit of a vanity project and a waste of money, so they weren't for me. I liked my black Woolworths plimsolls. For years, I favoured a map and compass. You remember that thing you hung around your neck in a nice waterproof bag in case it rained a lot, which it usually did. And I'd rather get lost in the mist for a while and have to navigate my way back to somewhere I recognised than rely on GPS devices, which I saw them, but I initially thought they were for people who didn't know where they were. I didn't know what they were doing. I have to admit, after about 40 years of climbing most of the Scotland Munros in a wide range of Scottish weather conditions and getting lost a few times, I have grudgingly accepted the value of the Ordnance Survey's app, which, well, this was me last week in Ben Village, a very fine mountain near Dufftown. You can see there, we're on the top. In fact, it was a nice clear day, so we could see we were on the top. But I do quite like the Ordnance Survey's map app, which doesn't cost very much, and it'll tell you exactly where you are, and it's very, very accurate. The other things that I think are great are the Mountain Weather Information Service. I used to go back to my car in the evening and hope that I could pick up Radio 4 and long wave and hear whether it was going to rain tomorrow. And you could usually look into the distance and tell it was going to rain tomorrow. But now you've got the Mountain Weather Information Service. It will tell you what the weather's going to be like in different parts of Scotland. It will tell you what the freezing level is, the visibility, the wind speed. So I think that, you can't not like that. And I love this app, Peak Finder, which some of you may have, which tells you what all those infuriating little pointy things are in the distance and stops you arguing with your friends the whole time about whether that's Ben McGee or not, because Peak Finder will tell you that it is. It's my digital sax, my Roland keyboard, or my GPS watch. It's interesting to know all three of these things are black, plastic, and made in Japan. So possibly the society that is furthest ahead in embracing technologies in a useful way for us is the Japanese. I thought just in finishing, I should, given the times, ask my computer about embracing technologies. So this is what happens when you ask Google AI Copilot to comment on embracing technology. You can see the results. Strategic leverage, cultural change, continuous learning. It's all great, isn't it? I would say it's a balance between staying in touch in modern times and being ready to grow for the future. It's all sensible and logical, but it's an answer which, perhaps a bit like my black plastic saxophone, lacks a bit of soul or character. And for me in medicine, while we'll always need technologies, and doctors and other health professionals who do well to work as effectively as possible with them, the essence of care, the centre of the therapeutic relationship, will always be compassion, shared humanity, and moments of joy and tragedy. And that's just something that the technologies will never understand or replace. So what are my speakers for the rest of the year? So I mentioned already, in 3 weeks' time, we've got Henry Marsh coming. He's changed his title subtly since then, but I put these slides together a few days before I spoke to him yesterday. In November, Rachel Buckingham, who's a children's orthopaedic surgeon in Oxford, is the longest serving of the Mercy ships surgeons. So she goes to ships which sail around Africa, taking on board children who have no hope otherwise of having operations to correct significant orthopaedic deformity. And she's been doing that for quite a few years. and is going to come and talk to us about some of their experiences doing that. In early December, we've got Nick Maynard, who's an upper GI surgeon in Oxford, who has spent the last 20 years going to Gaza, initially in easier times, but has continued going in the last year or two as well. He's been twice this year, so he's going to come and talk to us about the sort of deterioration in conditions there and what it's been like to provide surgical care over that time. In January, Norman McConaughey, one of my colleagues who, as I alluded to earlier, has made neurosurgeons' lives a lot easier in the last few years by taking on some of our trickiest cases for endovascular management of aneurysms, is going to talk more broadly about the endovascular management of neurovascular disease and what will be our Tony Mitchell lecture for this year. In February, we've got Jerry Dolan, who used to work here as a haematologist, many of you will remember, and is now the Haemophilia Centre Director in London at St Thomas's, going to come and talk to us about modern understandings of haemophilia. In March, there'll be a Vale of Trent faculty meeting as well, which is still to be finalised. And then in April, Professor Ben Baxendale, formerly consultant anaesthetist and honorary professor, a long-term MedChi member as well, actually, and previously social convener of MedChi for many years. He's going to tell us about his new interests in life as well as his old ones, learning new skills from the practice of medicine, the business of brewing. And at that meeting, he'll also give us some instructions on how we could go along to a social event a week or two after to see how it's actually done in person. So that's followed down in May by Daniel Sokol, who some of you may remember came a couple of years ago, the Mayor's president. Daniel is the BMJ's ethicist, and is a fascinating character who has sort of two careers. He works both as a barrister in the legal world, but also as an ethicist working for the ethics committee at St George's, and can often give you, his title the last time was "Should Doctors Always Tell the Truth?", which turned out to be a rather more complicated question than it sounds at first. And this time he's going to talk about helping clinicians in trouble and what we can learn from that. So I hope that's a balanced and mixed year and there'll be something for everyone in there. Thank you very much. Happy to take a question or two, but otherwise I suggest we finish. That's Simon Howard and me on the telly. My comments on that, don't do telly. Don't do telly, Simon, don't do telly, it's not good. It's hard work. I didn't listen. Roger.
Microphone. It gave me a few internal shudders when you were talking about the past in the 1960s. Particularly, though, I was interested in the well-loved Index Medicus.
Yeah.
Because many people here, perhaps, have spent hours in the basement of a library pouring through Index Medicus, looking for references that may or may not have existed, and then following them up. And the important thing about that, when compared to, for instance, online data, is that you could go there looking for something and come out with ideas that you never even thought existed, just by spending several days wasting your time in there reading something that you weren't looking for. And on online data, you know what you're looking for, you find it usually in some form or other, and you don't look at anything else. And I think, you know, there's a trade-off there, isn't there? I mean, there's a lot of time wasted in libraries by me and other people looking at Index Medicus, and at the same time, maybe we're missing out on the breadth of exploration of data and things that we don't fully know they're there. Do you think?
I do. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's sad that, and goodness knows what's happened to all the Science Citation Index and Index Medicus. They've probably all been shredded or burnt or stuck in landfill somewhere, because I can't imagine people go back and look at them. They will have become out of date once people stopped updating. It's a bit like the Britannicas. Nonetheless, I think the speed with which you can answer a question now, you know, is quite remarkable. I first noticed it in, I think, 1997 when I came down here and was working with Jonathan Punt. And Jim Lowe at that point had a computer in his office and could do a literature search on it. And whenever we had a question we didn't know the answer to, Jonathan Punt would say, go down to Professor Lowe and ask him the question, and he would print out, give you an answer, and that felt quite remarkable. It was a bit like doing a Google search. He gives you a list of 50 papers you might want to go and look at, printed out on that old kind of toilet paper with the holes down the side, you went up. You still had to go to the library to find the papers, but it was the beginnings of being able to do a literature search. And you know, people of my generation and yours, but before, did dissertations that took months to try and answer a question, and suddenly that can be done in minutes, can't it?
Since 1980s. Hours in cardiothoracic theatres. I spent many hours listening to Dolly Parton and other country music with the consultant at the time. Is that non-PC now, or are you allowed to play your music in theatre?
I think I don't listen to a lot of music in theatre now. There's quite a bit of noise in theatre with machines going ping and various things already telling us what's going on, and just as part of communication with colleagues and communication with the nurses, we don't listen to as much music in neurotheatres as we used to. Some of the members of the band I'm in were in neurotheatres at one point, and we probably drove other people potty by listening to the music that we were practicing or playing or considering playing. And I think you have to be careful what you're listening to and whether it's annoying other people, getting on people's nerves. One of my colleagues, who shall remain nameless, used to listen to recorder sonatas very loudly that he liked, but no one else did. And I think that can be, and I worked with a surgeon in Edinburgh who'd gone to America, and he'd come back a changed man and loved both types of music, country and Western. So he would just listen to country and Western music really loudly in theatre the whole time. And the night before Catherine came home from hospital as a baby, I was up all night doing a Coda Equina, listening to country and Western music with this guy. I had no sleep. And I just had, listened to this thing thinking, oh God, I wish Mike had never gone to America. And so I think music in theatres is an interesting one. And it probably is important to ask other people what they want and move it around, give the anaesthetist their choice. When you do awake craniotomies occasionally, you would sometimes ask the patient what they wanted to listen to. And you get some interesting ones there in terms of what they thought was relaxing music to listen to while they were awake in theatre. Hold it.
It's a comment from Professor Baston's comment about library. And so you see, library for me, the library is not only a library, it's a place where you meet people as well. You see people, you get influenced by, there's a little bit of peers there. Interestingly, I met my wife in a library. So humans are social animals. What's your take on technology and this explosion of social media and a technology in human interaction that's coming? And what's your take on that?
As I said, as I was finishing, I think it has its place, but I prefer to meet people. I prefer to have meetings with people face to face. I prefer to try and resolve issues at work by going and seeing someone. And I think there are occasions when it's more convenient to use technology to have Teams meetings and convene things. But I think if you look at what we spend our time doing at work, you sometimes go home at the end of the day and think, where did my day go? And it largely went on looking at emails that other people had sent you that you probably didn't need to bother reading or getting. And we spend a huge amount of time as a result of the ease with which we can just ping things to one another, and now abusing technology and abusing other people's time. So I think you have to keep it under control and keep it in its place and continue to see the importance of physically going to spend time with people, going to see people and going to see patients. And every time I'm sitting at Microsoft Outlook and I try to do something and it stops and the little circle of death starts and it says Microsoft Outlook isn't responding, I resist the temptation to punch my screen and decide to go to the ward and see a patient instead. Because that's going to cheer me up, would be a more useful thing to do. And I think we all need to do a bit of that and see the value of the technology, but keep it in its place and not let it rule our lives. Yeah.
There's no operation which is now impossible. In a way, risk. Patients sometimes never understand what risk is, and some doctors don't understand what risk factors is. Are patients being referred to the appropriate centre? is the seeking the best treatment?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And some patients assume that if you have enough technology, you can do anything. And I think there's an element of that. We do operations now that we wouldn't have done years ago. And we do operations now much more quickly, much more smoothly, and with less risk now than we would have done years ago. Quality of things like bipolar and microscopes and imaging and the plans. We can take on bigger cases. But I went as part of my training to Paris, to the Children's Hospital there, to look at the tumour practice there. And one of the things I learned most was about the patients they decided not to treat.
Yeah.
There's always patients who you can do amazing operations for, but people said this to me and they were right. One of the important things to learn is when enough's enough, or when you see a child with a tumour and you think there's no point in even starting. This is not something that we can manage. And I think that will always be the case. There will be things we can't do, and we need to understand where the limit is while trying to use technologies to make things more and more possible. Martin.
Oh, thank you. Two big differences I have. Probably more demanding and probably more knowledgeable. Information. Has your practice changed over the period of time in terms of the explaining to patients what's going on and what to expect? I mean, it seems a bit more vulnerable, and particularly in neurosurgery.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of sides to that. Some of the patients who would sort information would come along before, but in the old days, they would bring along the first book of the human body or two volumes of Encyclopedia Britannica to talk about the brainstem. Whereas at least now they've gone online and they've probably found more relevant stuff, and it's easier for them to follow. And you hope you can kind of work with them. And I don't mind sometimes with patients saying, let's look and see what we would find if we looked this up on the internet, if we asked this question, let's do it together. And there are certain resources for us for common conditions that cause anxiety, but don't, and frankly, need much done about a lot of the time, like cavernous malformations. There are great websites like the Cavernoma Alliance that are full of really useful information for patients that ultimately save us a lot of time. Because they go to that, they can see medical stories and patient stories and realize that the best thing to do is often nothing. And they didn't hear that from you and assume that's just because you couldn't be bothered. They heard it from you and then they went and looked it up and saw it as well. So on the whole, I think there are more useful things out there. And I think also, increasingly people come and tell me they've Googled me before they've seen me. And you'd have to just live with that. Lucy, my youngest, you Googled, is Donald MacArthur a good neurosurgeon, didn't you? Unfortunately, the answer was that I was okay. But, so if patients do that before they come to see me, that's fine. I think we have to recognise the world we live in now, that they will be doing that and try and see the positives of it. David, might look at the last comment because it's 8 o'clock.
Do you think in the era that many of my contemporaries retired, the IT systems in the hospital were one of the factors that precipitated their enthusiasm for leading the building? Have they improved in the United
I wish. So, David, that's a good question because, most of us don't particularly love what we're working with at the moment, but the Medway, as you might have remembered it, which has become CareFlow, and Blue Spear, which we book patients with here. So both of them are being shelved within the next few weeks, and everything's going on to Nerve Centre, the electronic patient record. And I literally fell asleep this afternoon at one point watching a training video on how to use Nerve Centre in clinic. And we're being asked what we think the impact of using Nerve Centre in clinic will be before we actually know what the impact will be, because it's not live. So there's this impossible situation of, I guess, the unknown unknowns. How much longer do you think it will take you in clinic to use Nerve Centre? None of us know. But nonetheless, they're closing down CareFlow and hoping for the best in about 3 weeks' time. So no, it hasn't got any better, I'm afraid. And so, I can see that the one thing we might get, I was trying to see the positives while trying not to fall asleep. Nearly everything's going to be on one system. Although I could see the insidious side of this. A lot of it seems to be about things that you type. And nowhere in any of the training was the letter you dictate to your secretary or the discussion you have about the planned follow-up time with your PA or your who organises your practice. That seems to have gone, and the assumption is everything's done on one screen through Nerve Centre. And I'm pretty rubbish at typing, and it will take me a long time to type my clinic letter on Nerve Centre if that's what they're really expecting us to do, rather than dictating things. And I've just wondered to what extent this is geared towards making us do that. We should probably call it a day because it's 8 o'clock. Can I embrace technology and take a selfie of me with all of you? Because I believe that's the done thing now, isn't it? We can have another nice photo as well. But... We'll see you back here in 3 weeks' time for Henry Marsh, hopefully. Yep. One more thing. I was supposed to have Shalinder, thank you. So Shalinder Singh is here from the MSc, and the MSc's annual dinner, which has become an increasingly major event in the social calendar, medical calendar, is on February the 12th at Goosdale. So that's a Thursday evening in February, and he would like to extend a welcome to anyone from MedChi to come along to the Medical Staff Committee dinner. We're planning to try and bring the two bodies a bit closer together for mutual benefit over the next few years, the MedChi and the Medical Staff Committee. So please stick that date in your diaries. So thank you very much again.